So Michele is an artist, a writer, a PhD candidate at Karolinska Institute, I don't know how you say that, and in Vienna Academy of Art, and he's also an activist for migrants' rights, an activist in Stockholm. He can maybe tell us a little bit about it. He's currently guest lecturer at Joanna Varsha's Curators Lab at Kunstfack in Stockholm, and his main focuses, the focuses of his research are Italian political philosophy, feminist theory, as we were saying, and theory of science. If briefly I can get more precise about that, I think it's interesting to, for me especially, because I'm also interested exactly in these three threads. I think, and I'm also working with science because I'm leading a platform of research between cognitive sciences and art. And in your research focus in theory of science is trying to understand the ideological and material condition of scientific production within life science, you're saying. So you're, of course, very much researching on biopolitical understanding of theory of science. And your research is informed by Canguilhem, Foucault, Marx, of course, Lucas. And for his focus on philosophy of life, Catherine Malabou is a very important reference, Agamben, of course, Foucault and Derrida, and Judith Butler. And Michele is really trying to understand how the biological can be plastic, can be open and not yet determined. So that's, of course, resonating a lot also with the feminist theory. And I think what is also quite interesting in your research is not understanding only the conditions of life under capitalism, but also more concretely understanding the transnational strikes, even historically, but also at the moment, and how all those strikes and all those struggles could become constitute power. So how to translate all these struggles. So Michele is going to do a lecture, but also a conversation that it's also, of course, open to the public about Aleksandra Kollontai, that probably a very seminal, important, and crucial figure that I got to know thanks to Joanna and Michele, which I think is very inspiring even to understand, to make reflections on today's situation, political situation, and feminist theory. So Aleksandra was a Russian communist revolutionary and a member of the Russian Social Democrat Labour Party. She is also known for being the founder of the Centro Del, the women's department in the Bolshevik Party, and also she was doing advocacy for free love, and I think it will be also something it would be interesting to discuss later. And I think I'm very interested in understanding the first intersectional analysis that she was making. So she was trying to, of course, understand and fight for the right of the workers, but at the same time for the rights of the women. And she was trying to understand how to be a mother, how to combine work and family. And I mean, there's lots to say, but you should start telling us.
Thank you, Elena. Does this work? Hello?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay. So, yeah, I mean, Kollontai, as any sort of historical figure when we enter into looking back in history, is I think, a very interesting spectrum. Like, how to look at the revolution. Now we are here in this context, and we've learned a lot about Lenin's presence in Helsinki. But of course, the revolution was not possible without the women, without the women's strikes. The women's strikes I would locate as one of the main forces to the revolution, basically. I mean, 8th of March, it was women who started the revolution, their strike. And in many ways, I think also women were the most precarious at the time, not only culturally, but on all levels, politically, socially, and physically. Their bodies were the most exploited, and mainly also because of the reproductive situation. The migration to the rural areas, the forced the prostitution, orphan children. There was a lot of issues that Aleksandra Kollontai, early on in her political career and her activism, recognized. However, Kollontai, this enigmatic person who's famous for many different things, also in many ways was brought up from in an aristocratic context. She was middle class basically, and therefore it's important, also an important lesson to understand how we, independently of our social class, today can transform ourselves as political agents. I mean, it's not a question, I think personally, about having only the right to this or that political issue, or this or that national history. I'm a Swede speaking about a Russian that was engaged in Finnish history in Finland. And of course, there are many problematic issues about that, but I think we also need to recognize that internationalism and engagement in every person's and every kind of political struggle is a responsibility to learn and to understand. So of course, that is different from knowing and being embodied in that struggle, in that political situation. However, taking a stance in learning and in being engaged and being part of and seeing the dependencies, the codependencies of different kind of subjectivities, political subjectivities, is essential today. And I will also want to sort of start with my concluding sort of remarks in reading and trying to research Kollontai's life and her engagement, especially in Finland. Kollontai was studied Marxism in Zurich, and became her first political scientific work. Was on Finnish workers, Finnish proletarians. So this also sort of gives me a very interesting point of entrance into contemporary situations, because the leading Bolsheviks were informed. They were very well informed about the social, the political, economic conditions of the subjectivities that were tried to form, right? So this is an essential part. She got her respect from Lenin, from the leading Bolsheviks, through her scientific work also. So she had a very well understanding of the political and social situation. And that research that she made, empirical research, was mainly based here in Finland. So I'm looking into how she was received in Finland at the time. And I'm very much acknowledging a Finnish researcher called Elena Katainen. Maybe she's here, I don't know. She's in political science at the department at Helsinki University. And she wrote an article in 2002, Kollontai Seen with Finnish Eyes. So this has oriented my reading a lot, and I'm borrowing a lot from her in my reading on Kollontai's reception and influence on Finnish history. So I wanted to state that, and the article has been translated in anthology. Now I'm translating from Norwegian because it's a Norwegian translation. Anthology: Revolution, Love and Diplomacy, Aleksandra Kollontai in Scandinavia. So for you who read Norwegian or Swedish, I'm recommending this book. It's very good. And I also think it's very important for us to revisit history, and therefore I will give you a short reading of the material. But I think because we are short of time, we will sort of enter into more pertinent issues and try to contextualize this material. Okay?
So can I also already ask you to, if I don't know if you were already going there, but about her publication in 1908, Finland and Socialism.
Yeah.
So she was probably very inspired by the fact that in 1906 in Finland, women got the right to vote already.
Yeah.
And she wrote this. She was very young when she wrote this paper, and then she was forced to exile in Germany. So maybe you can, I don't know, for me it's interesting to understand how much also Finnish, I mean, the struggle that were done already, and the fact that here the women could vote already.
Yeah, she was very much inspired by the fact that the vote of women were introduced very, very early in Finland, before Russia. But I think I'm just going to read because there's so many details. I hope it's okay. Kollontai's early writing and research was focused on studying the Finnish working class. In her memoir, she mentioned how her interest in the so-called Finnish question sparked in 1899. And this was, of course, very much the Finnish question. I mean, is an issue that basically relates to how both the colonial issue, how should the Bolsheviks relate to Finland and the liberation of Finland, basically. And of course, with the revolution, Finland becomes independent. So there is a very tight relationship between the Russian Revolution and Finnish independence. And in this history, the national history, which is also very much connected, from what I understand, with both the right of the Finnish right and the Finnish left, the Social Democratic Party in Finland at the time. I think Finnish independence becomes the central point for the working class in Finland to mobilize also. I mean, the Tsarist Russia is the main target. And actually, the fact that Finland doesn't go all the way in this 1917 and become, the revolution doesn't sort of follow through, is very much because of the nationalist project that is starting at this time. Finland becomes a nation, more maybe than a revolution. And this, of course, for Kollontai and for the Russian Bolsheviks, the Finnish independence is essential, but also going into the revolution. And this is a very sort of intricate history, of course, because after the revolution we have again with Stalin a recolonization of Finland, a war, a necessary period to remember that the Winter War, where Kollontai was also very important in diplomatic negotiations. However, Russia becomes an enemy again in that sense for the left, you know. So this is an important point to remember. And however, in 1899, Kollontai met with the leadership in the Finnish Workers' Party that was founded in Åbo. And leading the failure of several strikes has been due to lack of strike funds and union organization. Kollontai donated the money from an article to support union organization in Finland. So she was very much involved in the unionization and the strike movement at early on. It is said that this is the reason Kollontai is called the mother of union organization in Finland. After returning to Russia in 1899, Kollontai continues her extensive research on the Finnish working class. And this is where she works on the articles that you mentioned. The Arbetsfrag in Finland is published based on the research in Åbo. She also completes the 300-page research, The Finnish Workers' Lives, and which I have here. And you can buy it on Amazon for $7,000, if you like. But it exists. And this is the work that I mentioned before, her empirical studies. And her contacts she had made in Finland were, of course, of great help, and she was very much involved with the leading sort of communists and socialists in Finland. And then she continued writing several articles, and she became sort of the expert for the Bolsheviks on Finland and Finnish working class. But I think one of the main points in that work is also how Kollontai engages with the women issues in Finland. And one of the most interesting parts of Kollontai's political work and writing was her close engagement with the women workers and the first feminist movements, connecting issues of workers' rights with women's rights, and sort of contributing with the first kind of intersectional analysis and political movement that you might say, although race was not a concept that was sort of, although there were strong issues of colonialism due to the relationship with Sweden and Russia. It's important to understand and acknowledge that Kollontai's thinking did not emerge in isolation either. I mean, I don't want to create this kind of figure, Kollontai as a central figure. She was very much embedded, Clara Zetkin, Rosa Luxemburg, I mean, Engels. She was part of the movement in many ways. So Kollontai should not be understood as a figure that created the movement. It's rather a person that we can read this history through like a spectrum. And the first article Kollontai wrote on the women question was in 1905, and the social basis of the woman question, and only and this. The reception in Finland was, I mean, this sparked a kind of debate within the movement. Should we do like the Bolsheviks? Should we do this kind of total liberation? How far should we go in in institutionalizing the family, right? In making the family something public, something that the state should run, all right? And of course, so Kollontai was very much a discussion point within the Social Democratic Party and the women's movement because of these articles that she wrote and were published here and translated to Finnish. So I think the main contribution is this kind of discussion on free love, which is should not be understood as sort of total promiscuity. I mean, she was not a person that wanted to promote prostitution or anything like that. But rather acknowledging that the material conditions of women had to be addressed. And one of the central points was, how do we take care of the children that were sort of orphaned? But the problem with the movement or the women at the time, the working class women at the time, was that their experience of orphanages was these kind of bourgeois Christian orphanages that had very strong, strict morals, Mm-hmm. So they didn't want, when these ideas were introduced to build state-run orphanages, they were very hesitant because they want to leave they had this bad experience, basically. And that, I would say, that delayed the introduction of some of the social policies that Kollontai was essential for and introduced as Commissar of Social Welfare in the first government in 1917, she introduced very powerful social reforms, social insurance for women, basic things that we today take as for granted, things that we think are normal, but are being dismantled, in neoliberal governance. We're at that point very far ahead, and in Finland those kind of policies were delayed with 10 years after, so they were starting to introduce them by the government after the Civil War, the Finnish Civil War. They got inspired by this, but it's very clear that you can see how her articles that were published and translated here had sparked the discussion among the left, basically, and then assimilated by the right very early on as as a possible way forward to the nation, and then they become depoliticized. They don't become leftist policies, but they become the policies of the nation, the Finnish nation. So that's one of the kind of interesting lessons of Kollontai's influence in the local politics. And I don't know how we're doing with time.
May I make a question?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to try to understand Kollontai's advocacy for love, not only, of course, as a discourse on sexual emancipation, but really in a more political way. So, and also to understand feminism not only as a struggle for inclusion, but more largely as a questioning of the structural characteristic of our social, economic, and political system. So I think if we try now to see feminism as a worldview that is antithetic to capitalism, probably your advocacy for love could be read as the possibility of also building new networks of solidarity, new concept also of community, of neighborhood, and could be interested also to, for me, to try to face the crisis of politics in which we are now, and also the use of this violent rhetoric that the politicians are using, and also, I mean, our society. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the inspiring thing is that for the leading revolutionaries of the time, this was a possibility. I mean, the possibility of changing and transforming the world. And today we have, I'm summarizing a very kind of depressed, defensive form of critique. We critique a system that seems impossible to change. But on the other hand, we have to acknowledge and be part of and witness, and not only witness, but be central in the movements and the struggles that appear, because any kind of oppression is responded with some sort of reaction, even if it's on an individual level, but also on a collective level. And at that time, the women movement was very important, and had the opportunity, albeit in a sort of slight chance in a short window of time, to really influence the Soviet Russia and the Soviet government. It was a very short period that Kollontai and the very radical experimentation actually had influence. So we can long for that moment where we can transform a whole nation, right? We can go from start and change the policies and take it, start from scratch in a sense, and use the research that we made on the issues and really implement them. That is a dream for us in a way, but we should not keep it as a dream. I think we have to do that research today. Look at the statistics today. Have that as an evidence, as a fact in a post-fact era, and also be very much not in a naive sense, but very much involved in the fact that we can change, we can transform, we can have a more substantial power relations.
Yes. But we have to try to get out of the mindset that at the end is intimately still patriarchal. And Audre Lorde, in her publication Sister Outsider, has been talking about how it's impossible to dismantle the master house with the master tools. So it's also really about understanding how to develop, different tools, and also the empirical work she was doing. Of course, I think, as you said, it was really important.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you have to read Kollontai and the feminists of the time in their time. I mean, I think feminist theory and feminist thinking and all kind of critical thinking have advanced a lot since. But in a way, we also get lost in that, and that's why it's very important to keep reminding us of the sort of sources and the essential points. Patriarchal society has material consequences for people. It's not a discourse, it's a fact, it's a sort of thing, And I think the need to transform, very essential power relations and be part of that is everyone's responsibility. Basically, everyone is affected and therefore part of it. Yeah.
Yes. So we have to try to care more for each other and avoid this, competitivity and this.
That's a very inspiring. I think we're reading Kollontai, the idea of a communal love, which is not, hippie love. We go and have sex with everyone. It's about real responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, we care for each other, for the creation of something else, something better together. It's not the end of society. It's the total society. Yeah.
Exactly.
And we have to cherish that legacy. I think that we are not. We cannot sort of compete to prosperity. Really, to total prosperity. Communism is a beautiful thought, but it's also a beautiful practice. It's a verb. To communize is to make something in common, to create the common. And that has consequences on legal structure, on a political structure, and a social structure. So to be communist today is something I think we can embody.
Yes, we can, exactly. And also if we understand feminist struggles not only as struggles of women that want to be included, but really essentially politically as a possibility to imagine the world in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think also, that 5 minutes. Okay.
yes.
I think, one of the, if we look at what Kollontai at the time and the women's movement at the time tried to, the class struggle that they were doing, they were trying to gain power relation that, if you look back, women were basically slaves to the men in the family. They were owned. They had no sort of, the idea that a woman would vote was, absurd in society. So the gains that they made at that time have been assimilated in, liberal democracies. We think that is a normal fact that women should vote. It's not a question, right? Although kind of abortion is sometimes has become a question again. The fact that we should take care of everyone's, that we have a responsibility for others' children has become a question again. So we are retreating back to 19th century ideals in many ways, although in another kind of economic structure. But I think we have to be aware of the gains that were made at that point, and sort of push forward the future gains. But then remember that we are losing certain battles at the same time in different nations.
Yes. So I know that there will be a final discussion, but I'm sure because we also want to really address the reception of Kollontai in Finland and address the way she's been promoting Finnish independence. I want to open to the public because I'm sure there are comments or questions.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe I give you the mic.
Michele, so you are an artist.
Yeah.
So it's like your main occupation, your field. So I'm wondering. So how does it work? It works. Yeah. It is working. I think. Yeah. Okay. So you are an artist. And, so for me, it's not really clear now how you basically get to this topic of Kollontai and revolutionary liberation. Basically, history of revolutionary theory, history of revolutionary ideas, history of liberation movement, emancipation, and feminism, the role of feminism from your artistic perspective. So it would be really great if you somehow show the relationship between these fields, because you are artists first.
Yeah, I think from a personal perspective, and I should say, the Kollontai theme is a theme that we're working in academically at the Konstfack University. So for me, it's a new theme. I didn't know Kollontai well. I had some readings, but the research is based on the project that we're doing. So that's the context. I'm not a historian and not an expert on Kollontai. Maybe that's evident, but
Absolutely, but you are an expert now.
But I think my point is that I think we have to sort of do this reading today. I mean, we should not only read Lenin after 100 years after the revolution or Marx. We should read Kollontai. She was an essential figure at that period. No, she was. She really was. I mean, and this is also how historians have sort of neglected her. Both Finnish historians. When I go through the Finnish history, I mean, there is extensive writing on the Finnish working class. No mention on her, on the first empirical work on the Finnish proletariat. No mention. She doesn't exist in the, very brief mentionings. So this is very important. And if we're doing the 100 years after the revolution, the feminist movement and the leading feminists have to be remembered also and historicized. I don't have any kind of smart connection to my artistic practice. I would say that my artistic practice gives me the autonomy to do whatever I want. You know,
that's good.
I don't have to hide behind academic formalism in that sense. So maybe I'm not doing sort of totally historically, academically incorrect reading, but I'm doing a reading, and I'm trying to doing a political reading also.
We have 2 more questions. Aimo and then Nora.
I have a little comment. I want to add that from the mother's side, Kollontai was Finnish. And once she said that she feels more Finnish than Russian because here in Finland she can breathe freely. And the other comment, once Maxim Gorky said that there are only 2 communists in Russia, Lenin and Kollontai.
Thank you. That's really nice.
Yes.
Yesterday when we visited Ilya Orlov's exhibition, Ilya Orlov was referring to his former project, the Museum After Ideology, and he made pretty clear that, of course, what we all know, that even if we think we don't live in an ideology, of course we live in an ideology. Yeah. So, of course, we realize, wow, no mentioning of Aleksandra Kollontai in the last years, let's mention it. But the question is what happens and how do we mention it? I have worked a bit on the history of feminism in Austria. And in Austria, it's clear that in the 19th century, it was a battle between the bourgeois feminists and the communist feminists. It was absolutely not important to be a feminist in the first place. It was important to be a communist feminist. Yeah. So now, what we experience when we think nowadays that feminism has won, what we don't get is actually that it won in an alliance with capitalism and neoliberalism. Yeah. So when feminism won, communist feminism didn't. Mm-hmm. And in somehow what strikes me when we sit here and discuss is that it's nowadays possible to mention Aleksandra Kollontai and to say she wasn't mentioned but Lenin was, so make out of Lenin a man. And not to talk about class struggle. Because actually when I read Aleksandra Kollontai and when I read about free love, then I read free love, number 1, as a promise of another possible love after the revolution. It's a revolutionary promise of free love in a process of freedom. Yep. And number 2, as a very important revolutionary affect. Mm-hmm. And this is a bit missing for me. And also, I don't want, actually, like her, I don't want to be together with many feminists in this world. I'm against many of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, of course, we all have to translate these concepts, this conceptual sort of elaboration that she made. But I think it's essential. She was the first thing that she got engaged with was women workers and women's strikes and she was essential in the building up of the socialist women's organizations. So she's feminist, communist feminism, and what is that today? Or queer feminist communism, you know? I mean, a queer post-colonial feminist communism, yeah. Because we also understand, finally, after, you know, decades of post-structuralism, that we also have to really deal with the material conditions. We have to do the class struggle piece also. We cannot only become aware of how we are reading each other's you know, histories and how we relate to each other as identities. We have to actually change the material conditions. Yeah.
What are also the material conditions of the gaining of identity politics?
Yeah, yeah.
That's my question.
Yes, yeah.
What kind of fantastic alliance have we got with
Yeah, exactly. I think it becomes very clear, on a very clear way. For example, Sweden now has been privatized in an extremely accelerated way the last 10 years. People think that Sweden is this, you know, socialist model for, you know, this alliance or this compromise between capital and you know, workers. But actually, you know, for example, this is, and it's probably very similar in Finland with privatization. You have when in the north of Sweden there's so much cutting down and austerity that women have to travel 100 kilometers to have birth. You know, can you imagine traveling 100 kilometers to go to the nearest hospital to give birth? You know, and this is motivated politically today.
By reading this change in the university to Aleksandra Kollontai.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So I think we have to realize the historical conditions we are in today, and that they are getting close. Not, of course, very, very different. And I mean, there are so many issues here to talk about: technology, increase of production, and when you know, there's this another example that I have is this Swedish TED talker who does social and health policy, Hans Rosling. He is the essential you know, person for me of neoliberal motivation of how things are getting better. Everything is, you know, poverty is disappearing slowly. We're doing small steps, but, you know, we look at the statistics, we put all the data together, things are actually progressing within this system. So we're taking everything for a given, you know. But, and in this, despite all the, you know, wars and, you know, colonial, is still, you know, things slowly will get there, you know. This is his sort of essential political, ideological message behind the facts discussion, right? So you have this fact discussion, a scientist telling you about facts, and then there is the ideological sort of message behind. Everything's okay, status quo, don't worry, don't make your revolutions. And I think you have to turn it around. This message is important. Why have we still got poverty despite technical progress, despite increased production of this kind? I mean, we don't need to work if we have all this sort of enormous capacity to produce and technology. Despite this enormous developments, we still have poverty. That is the question we should ask ourselves. We still have misogyny. We still have, you know, women dying. You know, we have these social issues despite, you know, the realization, the enlightenment of what we can do, how we can change society.
So I would just interrupt for a bit because we have the break for lunch, and I think that we can continue with this conversation. I don't want to break it, but just to have like the possibility of continue the program.
No, so it's time to eat.
We come back, is it like at 2? Is it 1? Yeah, 2. And there's like the next, we will continue with a conversation with Nora Stenfeld and Vinny Adamczak. So I welcome you all here at 2. And I think there is possibility to have lunch within the building itself, in the Commodore's area. So thank you.